So, homemade knives. First off, welcome to Rayray's Big Gay Knife Show. This is our second episode. Our first episode was me kind of talking about ballad songs and shit. I think this would be a good second episode though, because last night I took a file and a bottle of mustard and I customized a knife that was kind of in my scrap bucket of stuff. I've got like a handful of knives that I call them my Mora knives. They're a really nicely made knife that, for whatever reason, never got finished or was finished up by me to the point that it can cut things, but it's not finished past that. Or it was just a blade that I threw some cord on and I needed a cutter that day or whatever, or that's just where that knife stopped. I did a bunch of early knives like that. There's some early shit in there. This one is the first knife I ever put a real handle on. I thought it was worth saving. I did a whole bunch of work on the blade. It's a Tonto. If you'd like to see pictures of the before and after, all that shit's on Instagram. It's a Tonto and it's a really skinny handle. Oh. And it has a wide blade. So it has kind of a guard like a chef's knife. And the handle is dropped back about like a quarter of an inch from where the guard starts. So it has this kind of like, I don't know, it locks into your hand. It's very secure. Shit ain't going nowhere. And I added some grooves onto the Black Micarta handle last night with a round file, and that's adding some traction. I like that. I never quite was happy with the handle. I didn't know what to do next on it. And I wasn't really happy with the look of the blade because it needed something. I didn't know what it needed. Found it. Mustard patina. I did a tiger stripe pattern with some mustard. It looks cool as shit now. Between the mustard patina and just a little touch with the file, I made this from a knife that no one would have bought. I know because I offered it for sale and no one bought it. To a knife that I guarantee you I could sell for pretty big money now. Little custom touches. I think that's part of the thing that, like, I never got to the point where I was playing with that kind of stuff while making knives. And the more I start doing with that kind of stuff, like, that's what I'm in the process of learning now. That's why, as far as I'm concerned, I didn't really need all of my old equipment. I know what that stuff does, and I know that's not how I want to make knives. So it's kind of done, and I needed to downsize anyway, and yada, yada, yada. The stuff that I sold was all about drilling holes and cutting shit out with a bandsaw, and that's great and all. But, like, I think I'm going to have laser cut blanks done. It's ridiculous. Like, I'm going to come up with a pretty consistent design of knife or a couple of designs of knife, and that's what I'm going to make. I'm going to have those laser cut. And handle-wise on them, I don't know. I like doing handles. It's fun. But at the same time, without a bandsaw, unlikely to happen. I really, really like doing cord wrap, and no one does it as good as I do, usually. I do cord wrapped handles that are legitimately so good that people would pay as much for them as they would a knife handle that was bolted on or pinned, riveted, whatever you want to call the things that it's, a real handle. The way I do cord wrapped handles is, first off, I started out at knowing nothing about this, so I've done it wrong a million ways. This is the right way. First off, you need to design your knife handle in mind with cord wrapping. This means, if you're going to have it kind of like go round at the end, it needs to swell before it goes down to round so that you have a place to stop cord. You can hide that with the cord, but you still need it. And one thing I really like to do is take a bandsaw, a metal cutting bandsaw, and do little like 1 millimeter cuts all along the edge at the back end of the knife, and usually on the back spine of the knife too, because you can make it jimping that goes into shit that holds on rope, and in particular on the ass end of a knife that doesn't have a good traction plan, you should put a bunch of those little cuts in, because if you wrap the cord tight enough and lock it into those teeth, that shit doesn't go anywhere. And that's without epoxy. Okay. And what I like to do is do that kind of a wrap on the base layer really tight and just wrap it around the knife, just round and around and around. And then I take a length of 550 cord and hollow it out. Usually, I had a formula at one point. I don't anymore. I would say I would pull out about 6 or 7 feet. Start there. That's for a standard sized handle. You'll have a little bit left over, but that's a good thing. I like to drill a hole through my tang, bring the end of the cord through that hole and tie it off with some knots and make a lanyard and leave it loose. And then once it's all wrapped up like that, I take J-Flex marine epoxy, mix a bunch of it up, rub it all into the cord, and I use my bare hands. You can use gloves, but whichever. I use my bare hands to press it into the cord. You need something that doesn't leave residue and shit. So don't use like a paper towel that will stick to the fucking epoxy. Okay. The rubber glove is questionable, to be honest. I don't really know if it depends on how hard the epoxy is drying. You know, I wouldn't worry about it, but I've always done it barehanded because my hands wash, and I'm sure that J Flex Marine epoxy isn't good for you. That's what I do. And at the end of it, you smush all of that into the rope as much as you can get it, and then any excess you just kind of wipe off with your hands and rinse off in the sink. Maybe wipe that off of your hands with a paper towel. Don't touch paper towel with a knife. Ask me how I know. It's unfixable. That is, in a nutshell, how you do a cord wrapped handle well. On that top layer that I hollow out, I like to go back and forth in a kind of Japanese looking pattern, and the epoxy holds all that shit on. Without the epoxy, that stuff won't hold on. The under wrapping holds itself on. And I think that's a big difference between my knives that have paracord wrapped handles and most people's. Is I just described to you a probably 2 or 3 hour process that I go through to make a fucking cord wrapped handle that works. It does not come off the fucking knife. Like, I could get it off, but I would have to put it in a forge. It's a plastic handle that I can mold layer by layer myself and do it in really cool patterns. That's what I like about it. I think that most of the coolest things I've ever made had cord wrapped handles. I also quite dig the real handles, though. I go back and forth. I just sold off all my real handle making stuff, though, and I kept the cord stuff because I like it better. And my thing is, I like brute to forge better, so much so that I'm never going to make a knife that's not got hammer marks in it, probably. If I do make a knife that doesn't have hammer marks, it's because I've lost my mind for some reason and want to do a patina job and need a really clean looking knife to do it. This patina on this knife is badass. Point of all of this is you can make knives at home. Did you know that? You will need a few things. You need some sort of way to heat metal, which the best way to do that is a propane forge. You need an anvil. The best way to get that is to buy an anvil. I bought a cast steel Chinese anvil for 120, 130 bucks on eBay. Every knife I ever forged, I forged on that anvil. So I'd say it's good. It's still in my garage. It's still good to go. It has nice bounce to it. Like it's a ridiculously good anvil for 130 bucks. At the point that you have both of those, and like a hammer and some tongs, you could make some rudimentary stuff for sure. That's a knife maker's toolkit circa 1700 or something. And you'll need like a hot chisel, cold chisel. Uh, you're definitely going to need files and some sort of a grinder. Um, Back in the oldie times, they had a big grindstone, right? Well, there's modern versions of everything. Belt sander's pretty much our modern version of that. I would buy a cheap, small belt sander. Maybe even something that's like a 4x36 or something like that. That's more of a thing I would use to do handles on, but I've ground blades on one of those before. If you were making an old school knife and that's your grindstone, it'll do that. It'll do that 100%. That's just, I'm going to use that to remove massive amounts of metal because I'm going to use files and sandpaper to finish because of the level of control that they give me. And that's just the nature of working with shit by hand. That's not as fast, but it can be done. And until I get everything kind of the way I want it, that's how it's going to be. So I need to find a grinder that I can do like stock removal shit, which like taking the corner off a bar of metal. Sometimes it's easy to do that with a saw. Sometimes if it's a hard piece of metal, it's easier to throw on a 36 grit belt and just take it off with a sander. And I sold my big sander because I'm stupid. No, in reality, I had to. The power source for that thing was 220, and nowhere I was ever going to go was ever going to have 220 again. I was a fool, and I bought foolishly. I should have bought the 110. However, that machine really didn't do everything I needed it to do. It did one or two things very, 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 very well. So well that it was worth the money. And I'm going to have to spend close to that money again, probably. And it hurts me to say that, but that's the case. But I have an ace up my sleeve when it comes to that. I have a flex rider. I kind of figure that thing's worth a grinder or a cheap car, one or the other. It's, that's my ace in the hole. Should I come up needing money and like needing money for tools, I've got a couple of guns that I would sell. That's not plan A for sure. Plan A is like find some job somewhere and just save it up. Honestly, if I could get the right job someplace and go play blackjack for a couple weeks, I could just go buy all the tools I fucking wanted. And a lot of you'd be like, well, how is that? Why don't you just go play blackjack now? Well, the thing is, you play blackjack completely differently when you have $200 in your pocket versus when you have 10 grand in your pocket. So it doesn't really behoove one to play blackjack, in my opinion, for the amount of money that I would go play it with right now. Which is why we buy and make knives, because that's more fun. It's not as fun as winning at blackjack, but it's definitely more fun than losing at blackjack. Now, the advantages of all of this shit that I'm talking to you about is that basically the setup that I just described of a forge, an anvil, the small stuff that you need to make those two work together, and some sort of a grinder. That will get you to the point where you can make your own shit to the finish level that you like. And that's all that this is about, really, is you need to get that. There is no perfect or done with a knife. If you want it to be 1,000 grit sanded out and mirror polished, then that's cool. That's on you. That's not necessary to make the knife work. I don't do that. I have hand sanded one knife pretty damn well once, just for a competition, just to say I could do it, and it was a beauty. Probably never going to do that again, though. Here's my point. The amount of money I have in materials in a knife, for example, the knife that I'm holding right now that I worked on last night, is a bar of O1 tool steel and a piece of micarta and a stainless steel rod. And I think I might have had all of $15 or $20 in the materials I used in this, and maybe all of $3 or $4 in the consumables that I went through using this. It's cheap, okay? Like, this is carbon steel. Carbon steel's cheap, but like that's what I would encourage you to make. Like, my favorite steels for knives are 5160 and 1095. I'm telling you that those are some of the easiest ones to work with. They get you very good results. Just go play with it. Try making something. And if you're like, I don't know how to do this, well, there's a billion videos on how to do this. There's books on how to do this. I'll answer your questions, but here's the thing at the end of this. For the cost of, 10 nice knives, you could have a setup to make some of your own. And in reality, for most of the things you're ever going to want a knife for, that's a better way to go. Now, there's a limitation on this. If you live in an apartment, there's no way that you can do this, really. I hesitate to imagine. I know there are people that do this in New York City and shit, and I tip my hat, I guess. I've been known to make shivs, and I imagine making a knife in an apartment in New York City is very much like making a shiv in a school. I never went to prison. I went to private school, and I've hated every fucking minute of it. And sat at the back making fucking knives. And basically, as a result of that, I found out that, like, a sharpened file that you did yourself, that you did do a zero bevel grind, that's where it's one consistent grind from wherever you started all the way to the cutting edge, instead of having that sharpening chisel grind thing it's got going on, where it's like it has an edge and then an edge. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about or whatever. It's like the false edge that people put on shit so that it doesn't scratch the living fuck out of your knives when you fucking sharpen them. Because, like, if you've ever seen a Mora knife sharpened, that's how a knife should be, in my estimation. And if you make them yourself, you can make them to where they are that sharp, and you have ways of sharpening them that doesn't hurt the finish. It's just like, disadvantage to this is you have to learn to make sheaths. That's harder. It's not impossible. I'm pretty good at it. I just hate it. And the reason I hate it is because basically I make the knife. I would like to be able to make the knife, hand the knife to the next person, and they make the sheath. I know that's crazy talk, right? But that's the thing I came to in my knife company, was that as a one-man show, I only make knives, not sheaths. And that causes issues. If you get into Kydex, you can do that pretty cheap. I don't like Kydex because it scratches up my knives. I sold all my Kydex making shit. I had a whole setup to do it. Everything you could ever want. sold all that shit because it was like I hate making them. I hate using them. I hate everything about Kydex. I really do, and that's why I just said I'm not doing Kydex anymore. Not for me, not for anybody else. I've got the card of a couple people that do leather work, and I need to send a box of knives to somebody and just have sheaths made for all of them. And then whenever I establish consistent patterns, which I would like to do like 3 or 4 different patterns of knife and have at least 3 of them fit the same sheath. Maybe have one of them be a big mammoth jammer that doesn't. Like part of me is like I'd really like to play with doing one-offs too, but like I just don't have that in me. I fall in love. When I make one-off shit, I fall in love making it. And that's, half of the reason I don't make knives for other people now. Point of all of this is you can get a knife that's as good as what I was selling for $500 or $600 for $500 or $600 worth of tools, probably. Probably a little more than that, maybe $1,000 worth of tools. You should definitely get into making knives if you like knives. And the main advantage of this is you get exactly what you want, assuming that you have any skill at all, which that is kind of a big assumption, right? But like, how do you get skill at anything? I can show you the first couple of knives I ever made, and like they are pretty good for someone that didn't know anything about anything. I'll admit that. I have, you know, a gift when it comes to this. Leave something in my hands that you don't like that you made, and I will figure out a way to make you like it. I know. I just took literally my most hated project and made it one of my favorite knives just by some subtle touches. Like this is the mastery that like I strive for, and it makes production on stuff to give away difficult. That's how I look at it. Like some people look at it like you got $500 for that knife. Yeah, but I took $20,000 off my life doing it. That's no shit. There's a couple of those knives in particular where I got $300 or $400 for them, and they got $30,000 or $40,000 worth of my life in the form of a knife. And half of my thing is like, in order to have truly great art, I think I would have to have kind of a studio environment set up to where I could do this stuff as it came to me. Like, I know exactly what that mustard patina knife needs. It needs X. You go grab it off the shelf and go walk to the shop and go do it and go put it back up. But that's like some of those may never get finished. This is the way painters work. Yeah, I know this whole video now is kind of just about me making knives, but like I don't know, this is probably interesting to anyone who would watch this. At least that's my thoughts. My reasoning for getting into knife making in the first place was because I didn't want to spend a bunch of fucking money. Flat out. The knife I'm holding, if I paid somebody to make it, would have been, oh, with Kydex, $350 easy. And it's nice that it cost me less than $20. This is why, if you like knives at all, you should get into making them. And make the thing that you want to make. And like, take what you do, learn from it, and make it better. Everything that you see me do with a knife, you might see me pull out a really old knife and do new stuff to it because, like I just did with this one, this is the first thing I ever put a handle on. So don't judge me by this one knife, but like, I try to be better with every knife than I was on the knife before, and I try to do stuff in between that gives me ideas for things to do. Like this knife here, um, is my idea test bed. That's really the great thing about this knife is it's the only knife I ever made with stainless pins. Only knife I ever will make with stainless pins. Learned that. It has a really skinny handle. Uh, I learned I needed to make my stock bigger at the start because it was going to get narrower. That's one of those things that like I didn't know that going in. It's common sense you would think, but like I don't know what I thought. I guess there's many ways to make a knife. What I thought was one way to make a knife, but it's not my way. My way is to make everything way oversized and then grind it to shape. And that's really the way. If your handle doesn't start out looking like a giant block of wood, I don't want to know you. That's, if it doesn't start out looking that way, it's not really going to fit your hand. And maybe that's the thing is everyone's hand is different. But like the thing that most people like that I find is they find knife makers that make things that fit them. Okay, so I try to make my knives fit different people. I've made knives fit me. I have a knife over there that's for my buddy Blazer. He doesn't know it's his yet, but I think it'll fit his hand perfectly. Whereas this one I just made with the mustard patina on it, it's got a long ass fucking handle. It's made for, I made it for someone whose hand was a little bit bigger than mine because my hands are pretty large, but they're not as big as they can get. And my uncle's friend, he's my third uncle, Uncle Tano. Uh, he has some meat hooks on him that this knife doesn't have a long enough handle for him, and it's a full inch too long for me. Yeah. So I always think about him when I make a knife, and if I make a knife for me, I make the handle just slightly bigger because it doesn't hurt me at all to have a handle that's slightly bigger. And for anyone who ever uses my knives that has bigger hands than mine, they'll appreciate it. I make it as big as I can stomach. And sometimes it's just, the knife decides what it wants. And like that's, something I think a lot of knife makers don't understand is I do not design knives. I have a general game plan going in, and then my game plan evolves as the knife comes out. So, like, generally speaking, if I'm going to do a Tonto, I have one game plan, and that involves doing grinding first, right? But if I'm doing like a normal knife, like I like to do, where it's been forged and then handled and then ground, the first thing that I'm going to do is measure out the bar of steel that I'm going to cut or whatever, cut it off, figure out kind of where my handle's going to be and where those cuts are going to be, and make some of those initial cuts probably if they need to be made. This is where like you could do the blade first, you could do the handle first. It really doesn't matter which. I tend to do the blade first, which is on one of these knives that I'm forging. I'm going to cut the end of the bar of steel at like a 45-degree angle, and I'm doing that with the tip on the downward side where the edge of the knife is on the long side. So it looks like a sax. I'm doing that because I'm going to forge that knife, and it's going to flatten and thin and spread that steel out to where that becomes a buoy shape. It doesn't look like it at the front, but that's what it's going to become eventually. And that's just a process of hammering that does that. So knowing, some of that shit comes with doing it. Like I telling you what I do will help you some, but in the end of the day, like, you could do this in so many different ways. You need to find your way. It's not about my way. Now, if you like what I do, you can learn quite a bit by copying me. And that's, there are a few knife makers that I met along the way that really helped me when it came to that. That's Newt Livesey and CMFTW Knives, Big Kitty Fuck the World, um, Matt Freeman, whatever you know him as. The two of them, just by like answering questions and telling me how to heat treat shit, basically saved me a lot of time and frustration. And that's where like that kind of information can help. And you can get most of that in Wayne Goddard's $50 knife shop. There's a few, modern things, or like, how do I do X for cheap in a garage? That is where talking to me or one of the former guys that I just mentioned would help you a great deal. Because, like, if you need to cut steel in a garage, there's some ways to do it that they don't tell you about in knife makers' handbooks that are viable options. For example, if you're limited on tools, you can either buy or make a hot chisel, heat up the piece of steel, and literally chisel off the pieces that you don't want and then clean it up with a sander. And like, this is where like I like to get creative and inventive and stuff like that and like solve problems on the fly. And that's what I like to do in knife making. And that's why like I don't ever draw a picture of my knife. I usually sketch the cuts I'm going to make the handle. It's like I have it in my mind what that handle looks like, and maybe I've even sketched that onto the blade, and then I've drawn the cuts because the cuts are different than what the handle's going to be. I have to, on most handles I have to cut off a bunch of metal and then sand it a little bit to make it look right, and then sand it more once the handle gets on. Anyway, um, this process though reveals the inner knife within the materials in a lot of ways. That's how I feel. Like, it's like sculpting or whatever. And this is how you get a knife that sells for $500 and not one that sells for fucking $50. Like, there's a whole bunch of knives that you could go make that won't sell for shit, including the one I'm holding. The one I'm holding, I don't think even now most people would like. I dig the fuck out of it though now because I see what I'm going to do on future knives based on this. This blade pattern shit, this is how I'm going to do all my knives. All of them that aren't, forged or whatever, or even maybe I might still forge them all, but clean them up as best I fucking can to a, shiny surface and do this patina. It's pretty dope. And the traction grooves on a straight handle, that's also dope. I'm going to do that. I'm going to do a better version of that basically on a buoy, I think. Like, I don't know when I'm going to do all of this, but I know that at some point I will be making knives again. That's good. I was kind of so far in the dumps that I was like thinking I was never going to make knives again. And, this little, mustard knife project fucking, I don't know, it restores my faith in my abilities, I guess. This is dope. And you could do this too. And have better knives than any of your friends. And have a hobby at the same time. And the cool part is, you can get a set of Peltor uh, Bluetooth headsets or whatever, the ear protection that has Bluetooth, and listen to music or a podcast while you grind knives. You're welcome. I personally like Dio, Holy Diver while grinding metal. That's just badass. Maybe some Frank Sinatra or some bagpipe music. I like odd shit. The cool part to me about this is it's kind of like an investment. Once you have the skill and the tools, the materials are cheap. And I wish I wish I still had all my tools. I If I had that to do over again, I don't regret selling a single fucking gun ever. I regret selling every tool I've ever sold ever. Mainly because I'm just going to have to buy it again later and it's going to cost me more money. But I needed to upgrade a couple of those. My, what's that called? Drill press and 6-inch belt sander were both done. They were done. And I got 100 for that belt sander, which was done. And I got another 100 for that drill press, which they didn't know had been used to drill holes in steel as much as it had been. You know, my my mentor, Big Kitty Fuck the World, Matt Freeman. I watched that man in the time that I was talking to him, which was only a few years. Like, I saw him on YouTube years and years and years ago, and subscribed to him and followed his videos then. Thought, man, that's kind of a crazy guy. And then I saw him on Instagram later, and that's when we became friends for like 3 years. Anyway, I don't remember why I was saying that. Thanks, weed. Oh, I don't remember. The drill presses. Matt would go through a drill press every 3 to 6 months. Um, he did not ever buy expensive ones anymore because he spent big money 3 or 4 times. And the way he used his drill presses, none of them lasted. He had straight flute carbide bits and WD-40. And you use the WD-40 as lube and you just keep on chucking. It drills holes, and it drills holes in anything. It will kill drill presses. My drill press, the motor's fine on it. Everything else is like falling off the damn thing, and I need a new one. I've had it since high school. And a lot of people will be like, oh, you should fix that or whatever. I probably should have. But at the same time, it's not worth it. And I needed some extra cash. The more cash I have, the more, you know, doomsday supplies I can buy, basically. And other things, I have projects I'm working on and whatever. And like, if it was a tool that I needed to keep, I kept it. Basically, all of my forging equipment is irreplaceable, really, to me, because it's shit that I found and or made or whatever. And like, that's the heart and soul of knife making to me. Everything else is kind of inconsequential. And I would love to find some things that don't run off of electricity to replace that shit with. If I could have a manually powered grindstone that actually would do some work, I would do that shit. And the main reason is I'm not wanting to make knives right now. I'm wanting to be able to piddle around with knife making again in my retirement. Right now, our business is well, I'm not gonna say what our business is, but we are good at it, and we are breaking hearts and taking lives or whatever. I think war is coming, and that's part of my whole mentality on anything. Is I could go get a job right now and save up some cash that I think is probably going to be worthless, or I can continue to kind of live off of my savings and investments and various things and slowly acquire more stuff that I want. I try to make my money last, and for some of it, like if it's $150 worth of knives, that's within the realm of, I'm willing to spend that in a month. I'm not going to spend $1,500. Not that I haven't. I spent quite a bit of my car money just like it was going out of style. And goddamn, was that fun! I the only gambling I did out of that money at all was I took $600 to the Hard Rock Casino and walked out of there with $1,800. That's because I was playing like I was going to lose. And that's a big thing with gambling to me is if I'm really low on money, I'm desperate to win, and it changes the game. I don't know whether it's voodoo or not or whatever. I think it's just it affects my mental state. You need to have more money in your pocket to gamble. Now, as far as steels to make stuff out of, if you're not going to order steel from a knife maker supply catalog or a steel yard, which knife maker supply catalog, you can buy much smaller pieces of steel, as you might imagine. As you also might imagine, someplace like New Jersey Steel Baron, you can get really good deals because you're buying in 7-foot lengths. I hope you have a way to cut it. Um, I did that once. It was worth it. I'd do it again. Um, I cut that into, I bought 21 foot of 2-inch by 3/16 inch. Oh, one, no, it's 1095 high carbon. Because that's honestly, that's one of my favorite steels to work in. It gets balls ass hard. It's easy as fuck to heat treat, in my opinion. It does like to do some squirrely shit when you oil quench it. My solution to that is basically while the knife is still hot in the oil, I put it in a vise with 2 other pieces of steel and sandwich it until it's fucking done. And that takes care of the warping issue. And this is like pro tips for anyone who's doing this, but I like 1095 because it's cheap and, like I said, it's easy to work with. Other than that one thing, it'll bend knives. You need to have them in something while it fucking does it. And like I think the real thing to do would be to get some aluminum heat sink plates. Uh, for doing stainless steels, and I would dunk the knife in oil and leave it there until, it was not red anymore. It was mostly cool. There's a fine line there where, like, you need to have a knife in the oil long enough that it is cool, but it needs to still be hot and smoky when it comes out, because you need to still have it hot enough to fucking work with. And this is too hot to touch, which makes it even more fun. But I imagine putting it in the aluminum heat sink blocks and standing on it would give you a very similar effect. But what I do is take it while it's still hot, sandwich it in between two other pieces of 1095 steel, and cram that bitch in a fucking vise. It works every time. It is a jumble, and I do get burned. But, it's not that bad. Once you've been burned by one that was yellow, yeah, none of those other burns really matter. Like, I do things all the time where I stick my right hand into a full temperature oven and touch food that has been in that oven for an hour, my bare hands, and hand it to someone. And people are like, how in the fuck do you do that? And I'm like, what do you mean? Like, literally, you just picked up that fucking taco shell or whatever it was, or that cake pan, and you didn't get burned or anything. And I'm like, well, I did that to a railroad spike once, and that burned the shit out of me. This is like uncomfortable. That's not a toughness thing or whatever. People are ridiculous about this. They're afraid of getting burned because they, either they got lightly burned once, or so like they've never been burned bad enough to truly know what to fear. It's exactly what it is. And you know, you don't pick up a yellow railroad spike because you're smart. I was smoking weed, as I do when I forge, and doing a bunch of different projects, and had had my tongs kind of in and out of my hands all day. And the motion that I use to pick up the tongs is it's a two-finger controlled grip. That's exactly what I did. And instead of working the tongs, I just put those two fingers on the yellow railroad spike, picked it up, and then dropped it. And then instantly regretted it. And like you'd be like, oh, that must have hurt like a son of a bitch. Not really. Like I put burn gel on it, we're good. Without the burn gel, it was maybe like a 5 or a 6. So that is what picking up a railroad spike is like when it's fucking 1300 degrees. Now, I did not hang on to it very long because I do shit when I work in shops that saved me. And that is every time I pick anything up, I tap touch it and then touch it. And this time, I tap touched it and picked it up and burned the shit out of myself. And like, the tap touch saved me from getting burned way, way worse. And the reason I say that is that it wasn't the reaction from the real grabbing of it that made me let it go. The tap touch is what triggered my OODA loop, which is a thing in your brain that's your decision-making process. That feeling that heat is what made me let it go. Okay, and it took that running through my whole body and computing some shit for a while before it knew whether to do that or not. If I had just picked up the hot thing, I don't think I ever would have realized it was hot. That's why the tap touch is important. Okay, it's really, really important. And like this is what I'm describing here is when you go to touch anything, you lightly touch it, let go, and then go again. If you're going to work around a blacksmith shop, you need to develop that habit. It will save you. If you're sober, it saves you from getting burned at all. If you're fucking high and forging knives at 2 in the morning or whatever, you know, I went and put some burn gel on it and I sat out for an hour or so and then I went back to forging. Okay. If I hadn't done the tap touch, that probably would have been a 3rd or 4th degree burn. As it was a pretty damn decent 2nd degree burn. It was on the verge of being a 3rd. It was pretty fucking bad. It's the worst that I have ever personally been burned. I didn't have thumbprints on my thumb on my right hand for a year and a half. And else. Like this is the stuff that like I think this podcast about knife making and knives in general could be. I should do one of these more often about just knife making. Because like in reality, if you got real creative and were a good scrounger and had access to family shit too, you could do this for free. Especially if you have land someplace that you can do this, whether it's a backyard at grandpa's house or whatever, and he has a shop full of tools. There's shit in there that saves you money. Okay? Even if it's like I started out, I had a die grinder. It's a rotary disc sander, pneumatic powered grinder. That's what I was making knives with. Because that's what I had that removed metal. I got that because my grandfather had it. Quickly found out that belt sanders were better. I miss the die grinder in some ways. It was a really fucking slow ass way to make a knife, though. That's the thing that really gets to me is after having ground knives all the different ways I have, shit, that die grinder's slow as shit. That 2x72 I had, you could have fed bars of steel into, and I was going through a billion sanding discs a night. They take off a quarter of the material for one knife or whatever. Oh. Shop safety is important, though. People stress a lot of shit that doesn't matter for shit. Like ear protection, you should probably wear. It's fucking noisy. Eye protection, I have glasses, so I never wore any. The glasses that I wear have ballistic lenses in them. It's as good as I'm gonna do. Um, Basically, I think my eyes should just think they're lucky stars that they get glasses. I don't think I would almost never wear fucking um, safety glasses at all, shooting or working. If you really want a set of shit to protect you, DeWalt makes a set of like wraparound things that have an elastic band that are good for the heat. They're like $12. God damn. I have like a rat's nest in my hair. Oh, that's the other thing is you should probably learn to like short hair if you're going to be making knives. That's half of why I almost can't stand to really go forge and shit anymore. I like having long hair, but it makes that suck. Eventually, I'll, get up the nerve and do that with long hair. I'll have to fucking tie it up. Oh, it's gonna suck. The the nice part about this hobby, if you get into it, is that legitimately most of what you make, if you make stuff that is successful to what your game plan initially was, or something even remotely close to it, and maybe make some lemonade out of some lemons, kind of a thing, but without making a handle that's a half inch wide, you can sell some knives. And I'm not saying like you should sell some knives. What I'm saying is make these things, make sheaths and holsters and everything for them, get them all ready to go, carry them, use them, then put them in a drawer and make the next one. That's what I wish I could have done. I sold so many. And like there's two in particular that I want back. Uh, One is Malverde, the green and black one. I like that knife, and the other one is my machete that I made, that Fine Ape has. I I hate to send people messages and be like, "Hey, can I buy my knife back?" I never should have gotten into the knife selling game. I think that was a mistake. You need to know if you're that person, and if you're not the sort of person that can let your babies go, then just do what I was saying and have a little garage operation and try to make cooler shit with the tools you got. The thing that I think is crazy is basically most of the stuff that I would teach you about knife making, you'll learn in 15, 20 minutes and using the tools for yourself. Maybe not. Maybe you're slow on the uptake, but some things are obvious to me. Maybe they aren't to everyone, but I think they are to most people that they use a tool like this. Try this, try that. Which one works better? That kind of a thing. Now, I can save you a lot of trial and error and be like, hey, I do it this way because of X, Y, and Z. And like, this is where a class would be pretty cool. I want to go take Jason Knight's class. There's other classes on knife making and shit that you can take. I have taught a pseudo class on knife making a couple of times. It's usually to very cute women that want to learn about knife making. Well, trans men, women, trans women, lesbians. I saw a meme that said something about what was her name? Uh, she is a Elizabeth Warren. That's her name. Funny fucking meme. But it's said something about something in horse-faced lesbians, and the joke of the meme was, "I have the strangest boner right now." Tall broads and horse-faced lesbians. That's what it was. Something to that effect. Like she said that on the news a while back. Horse-faced lesbians. I always thought Sarah Jessica Parker looked fine. I don't know why people call her JoJo the horse-faced girl. I mean, she's a fine-looking filly. I love Sarah Jessica Parker. People make that joke entirely too much, and the horse-faced lesbian thing just teed it up too well. Now, if none of this has dissuaded you from making your own homemade knives, the easiest way to get into that is to buy a piece of metal that doesn't need to be heat treated and then very carefully grind it with a bucket of water in front of you so that you can keep dunking it in the water as you grind it. It saves you needing to heat treat at all. It means that the only piece of equipment that you need to buy is a grinder. And then when you're done, whatever this is, it's already hardened, just needs to be tempered. And As far as things that are already hardened go, the go-to is files. My second knife was made out of a file. I would buy a Nicholson Mill Bastard file. I would try to get an older US made one probably on eBay. I don't know where their shit's made now. Last I checked, they were still made in America, but who knows? The one that I bought in high school is a rusted out fucking hunk of a MacV SOG knife that's in there in my collection. It's seen some shit. And this is my thing, is all of my favorite knives are shit that I made. Really. Like, I'm gonna buy some stuff that's like, I want a kukri. That's gonna be one of my favorite knives when I get it, but you know, so will this thing that I just made with the mustard patina. And go check out those pictures for inspiration. If you go back through my history on Instagram, there's a bunch of knife making posts where I kind of just show what I'm doing as I'm doing it, talk about it. All of those would be helpful to you. If you have questions about knife making or how to get into it, ask them below this, and I will make specific response videos to you on what about knife making. Because, like, most of the advice that I could give you would be how to do shit on a budget and which version of a tool to buy. Because, like, that's a hard one. And, like, it really depends on what you're wanting to do, right? You know, if you're wanting to make, stock removal knives that, are Tontos, have intricate handles and shit, like, maybe you need to buy a different machine than me. Because, like, I'm going to be forging and doing cord wrapped handles. And my tools are going to kind of be a result of that. Now, if you're going to be doing different shit, tell me what it is you're going to be doing, and I can tell you, different tools. Because, like, my thing is, I like all of my shit convex ground. And the sad part is, I just sold a machine that convex ground like a motherfucker. Oh well, we'll get another one of those. But as such, like, I have no interest in a machine that flat grounds or hollow grinds. Like, it's just, the only reason I have those is for just stock removal shit. Like, I have a corner of this bar that I need off, so I'm going to use the fucking flat sander. Or, like, I'm going to do a handle, so I have a 6x48. And really, if I was going to recommend you to get any one sander, a 6x48 belt sander is nice. It is very nice for doing many things. It gives you a big surface that sands the whole thing. So you can take shit and just run it across there if it's a long object, like the back of a knife. And, when doing that, you might want to be careful, because I have shot one of my knives so hard that it went into a cinder block wall from one of those. It didn't go very far in, but it went in, which, if it went slightly into a cinder block wall, I think it would go all the way through you, probably. It's one of those, there are hazards in the shop. Like, that is something to note, is, again, I already mentioned earlier with the burns and shit, this is dangerous. Know what you're getting into. It's rewarding, though. The thing I like most about it is I get my own custom shit that no one else has. A. B. It's something that no one can take from me. I have mastery over this skill. Like, my buddy Blazer and I could literally sit down in a barn with a box full of materials and just start making this shit. And, like, that's really, like, I was talking to him, and, like, He wants to make holsters and shit. And I'm like, dude, I need someone to make sheaths. It's like, this is where I am at, really, is that I love making blades. And I love putting handles on blades. After that, I'm kind of done with them. I need someone who takes them from that point and makes a sheath. It's a finished knife. It is a piece of art and whatever, but like, it is not a carry system yet. I think that is where Blazer would be excellent. And especially if we could get it where like we have kind of a smoke room kind of an area attached to a fucking air conditioned shop, and we're just bouncing back and forth all the time, and I'm working on a knife and throwing knives into a pile, and he's taking knives out of that pile and putting sheaths on them. And my thought there is, if we could get that down to a process where, you know, we are making something that is the way that I like to make shit, with a sheath the way that I like to carry shit, and have a price point that's like competitive, not 100% competitive, but like, I want to be cheaper than Essie on some things and be handmade, basically. And the general idea here would be, at first, it's just he and I cranking out blades or whatever when we have time, when we want to have fun or whatever. And we sell those at a gun show or whatever. If we can turn that into enough money, we hire people and we keep the knives that price. If we can't, then as we make, you know, more of a name for ourselves, the prices bump up. And eventually, someday, they're just $2,000 knives. There's a waiting list. Because that's just kind of the way it is with a lot of knife making shit. But like, that's my real holdup, is having someone to have fun with in the shop, and someone that makes sheaths. Because basically, I can make at least a knife a day. If I know that I have someone doing sheaths, I can probably make 3 or 4 knives a day. Because I'll do them in batches. And like, maybe it'll end up being that like I take a week to make 24 knives or something like that. But you know, that would be the way it would go. Is I would do that, and then maybe if we're doing it in big batches like that, I do a week of making knives with him having kind of a light week helping me, and then he does a week of making sheaths with me having kind of a light week helping him. And at the end of it, you have 24 knives that you could sell for a couple $100s a piece. Which, if my math is right, 200 times 24 is $4,800. Yeah. So it'd be, you know, $5,000, and then there's gonna be overhead and costs and shit like that, right? But like, this is the thing, is I think a lot of us that are into these kind of knives, if we could find a handful of buddies that also are into this and are willing to do some work, and by that I don't mean like, I get pissed when people look at some of what I do as not work. I haven't done much relating to knife making in a minute. The things that I've done on this knife are changing the things that I'm doing on every knife that is to come. Like, I have I have 2 generations of shit going in there in my collection right now, from various periods of my shop or whatever. I am preparing to go into my 3rd period or whatever, and whenever I do that, I'd like to have some bitchin' knives. And I really like this handle jimping thing. I'm definitely going to do a knife or two like this. I want to do kind of a K-bar thing now with a handle like this. It would be dope. And like the mustard patina thing I already said, is like, I think that is what I would like to do on all of my knives from here on out. I don't know how much hammer marks and forge shit I want to leave versus how much tiger striping I want to do. But it might be like I do some way and do one the other way, or what, It might be a case by case basis. I really like the tiger stripe mustard patina though, but I'm a tiger stripe fan. Oh. Everything that seems like not work that I've done over the past 2 years is about to make my knives way fucking cooler. Because I've been changing the mental state of what makes those knives, basically. And like, I don't know when I'm going to be at the intersection of mentally, physically, shop. But as soon as those meet, I would like to crank out some shit. Especially if I could get some machines that can do shit that I would like. Like, there's no machine. Ooh, sorry. There's no machine that does convex grinding. And that's what I really like. And that's one of those, like, this is why we're not making production knives, really. This is why, like, the goal is either to hire monkeys to make production knives someday, or continue to make less and less knives for more and more money. Well, it's with those thoughts I'll leave you. I would encourage you to at least play with knife making. I think the way to play with it, would be to make a wreckage knife. That's, find some piece of steel that you can put an edge on somehow, probably with a file. I would use thin metal because, like, it's a wreckage knife, right? Figure out some sort of way to cut it out into a knife shape and then throw some cord onto the handle and get the experience that is bringing to life a weapon that you designed and made with your own hand. Go make a shiv. See if you like it. Be my advice to you. This fucking Tonto is a beast. Like, it doesn't stick unless you hurl it. And when you hurl it, it sticks. It goes deep enough into my deck outside that I was afraid I wasn't going to get it back. I need new decking, so I throw knives into it. On that note, I shall leave you. I hope you have enjoyed episode 2 of Rayray's Big Gay Knife Show. This is a little bit of a different episode. We mostly talked about knife making and why you should get into it from like a budgetary perspective, which I think even now, even if all you do is, buy a grinder and make some file knives, you'll have fun. And I really, that's what I should show you guys how to do. At least explain in a video. That might be good. I will explain how I would make a knife cheap in a video soon. And I'll show off my second knife, which is exactly that. It is a Nicholson file that I ground into a knife shape and then ground a edge onto, and then I threw it in the oven. In case you didn't know this, to temper a blade, all you do is set your oven to the proper temperature, which can vary depending on the steel, but it's usually on my oven, it's 375. And that gets me the temperature that I like in color of steel, which I don't remember what that corresponds to, but my oven is completely fucked. What you're looking for is to bring the entire blade to a straw color. The blade changes colors as it heats up. You want it to start turning yellow. You don't want it to start turning blue. If you do want a more durable knife, you can do it till it turns blue. I did that on a knife I did for a competition. It was a dagger. And only thing it was ever going to be for in its whole life was stabbing. And its edge was made for stabbing. And its blade was made for stabbing. And as a result, I left it a little soft. And it functioned perfectly well. So, like, heat treat can vary, but you can do it in a household oven. That's a key that I didn't talk about in this that you should really know. You don't need to go buy a heat treat oven. The heat treat oven would be for hardening, actually, believe it or not. You could probably temper in one too, but you'd have to cool it completely down. And I don't know anyone that does that. Everyone I know that tempers in an oven, or maybe even like a toaster oven. I don't know how hot toaster ovens get. I know you can do Kydex in them. I don't know if you can temper in them or not. You probably can. I need to make a small mobile knife making setup. Have it like bolted to the van. Wouldn't that be badass to have the knife maker mobile? I'm really ending this now. Tell me what I should bolt onto my van for knife making.